The Carissa mine and mill have a rich history that spans nearly 90 years of gold exploration and processing activity. In 1867, the Carissa lode became the first hard rock claim recorded in the Shoshone mining district. Exposed quartz veins were discovered protruding from a ridge above Willow Creek. This quartz contained an abundance of gold. The origin of the name Carissa was unknown, but area miners soon changed the name to the more feminine-sounding Carissa. At first, prospectors dug shallow shafts and open pits from which ore was easily removed.
When a miner made a discovery of a vein cropping out at the surface, he would try and determine its course first. And once he determined what he thought was the course of the vein, then he would put 4 stakes at each corner of his claim and put a notice up right in the center of the claim, advising everybody else that he discovered this and he was claiming it. And then he would go to town and find the what they called the district recorder and enter his claim in a record book.
As the early miners at the Carissa reached greater depths, they encountered ore that had not been exposed to erosion and other natural forces. This material required greater effort and technological sophistication to separate valuable metal from the host rock.
After they got more than a few feet deep below the surface weathering, they had to drill holes by hand using short lengths of drill steel and making them longer and longer and pounding them with a sledgehammer by hand until they could drill a series of holes several feet deep in the rock. And they would fill those with black powder, and then got to be careful tamping that stuff in the holes. And they would set off those holes in a certain pattern in order to break the rock the most efficiently.
As shafts sunk lower and lower into the surrounding terrain, ladders and artificial lighting were installed. Miners also constructed simple hoists to raise buckets of rock for processing.
It was a lot of backbreaking labor. The standard day was 10 or 12 hours a day. Being down in that hole or being up on top, winding up a 500-pound bucket of rock or a 100-pound bucket. Usually with 2 guys, one on each handle of what they called the windlass, you could lift about 500 pounds of rock. About 150 pounds was about as much as a man could.
Mining in the Carissa's early days was riddled with hazards. Foul air filled the deeper shafts. Poisonous gases from spent explosives combined with carbon dioxide from the miners' own labored breathing. Falling rock and cave-ins also took their toll, and almost all mining operations below 75 feet were complicated by naturally occurring groundwater. For the miners, hard rock mining was a hard life. For thousands of years, humans have experimented with chemical and mechanical methods to break down ore and collect the gold within. Technology slowly evolved that essentially mimicked the action of natural forces. Collectively, these technologies are known as milling.
The idea of the stamp mill has been around 800, 900 years, and the ancient Egyptians knew about amalgamation with mercury.
At first, all of the ore removed from the Carissa was transported out of the area for processing. But in 1868, a mill was erected on nearby Willow Creek and began processing the ore from the Carissa. It used heavy hammers, called stamps, each weighing hundreds of pounds, to crush the ore.
And those stamps would rise and fall and crush the ore to the desired fineness, which was controlled by a screen on the outlet of the stamp mill. And that was usually 30 to 60 mesh, which is a screen that has 30 to 60 holes per square inch. So they're grinding it into powder to liberate the gold from the rock.
Once the ore had been broken down, gold was extracted through 2 methods. It could be trapped in water riffles, similar to those found in sluice boxes. Or the crushed rock passed over a mercury-coated copper table, capturing the fine gold through a reaction known as amalgamation. Worthless sands slipped by the mercury unaffected and were discarded. But mercury amalgamates, or unites with the gold, allowing collection of the precious metal.
Silver and gold are the only things that will really amalgamate with mercury. And when the mercury or quicksilver gets loaded up with as much gold as it can take, a good mill man will know, because that mercury will get real stiff and hard, and then he'll know to scrape the plates and retort the mercury and get the gold back out of it.
But the technique was hardly efficient. Besides the problems associated with the unabashed use of toxic mercury, stamp milling only recovered about 60% of the gold. The remaining 40% simply washed away with the tailings. By the mid-1870s, with the easily mined surface ore played out, the Carissa became a marginal operation. It essentially sat idle for the next 2 decades without any substantial development. Change arrived in 1890s America with a newfound industrial optimism and a renewed nationwide interest in gold. At that time, a Chicago lumber magnate became interested in the Sweetwater mining district and succeeded in acquiring 16 mining claims, including the Carissa. The new owner, John Spry, was determined to erect a modern, state-of-the-art mill at the mine site, now owned by his Federal Gold Mining Company. Equipment ordered from mining supply companies had to be freighted by horse and wagon from the Union Pacific Railroad at Point of Rock Station, some 80 miles distant and nearly 1,500 feet lower in elevation. Through the tenacious efforts of Spry's local manager, Barney Tibbles, the new mill was up and running in short order. Timber cut from as far as 10 miles away lay heaped in stockpiles to feed the mill's boilers. All of the equipment was run by a single coreless steam engine. A network of flat belts and electric generators distributed the power throughout the mill. Prior to the federal gold mine, the Carissa's underground workings were a maze of shafts and horizontal tunnels called drifts. They meandered haphazardly in whatever direction the vein took miners. Just how and where to find the underground pay streak was the big question.
Sometimes you'll run into 3 or 4 different strands of vein because the entire structure has been folded over. So when you drill at it from the side, you'll run into one vein, and sometimes you'll run into the other leg of that folded vein, and then sometimes that'll be squeezed out and it won't be there.
Federal engineers realized they needed to move beyond the weakened rock of the early gopher holes, as they were commonly called, and concentrate their mining in solid rock that required little timbering for support.
And they sank the shaft from like 130 feet down to 400 feet and several thousand feet of drifts or tunnels along the vein on 4 different levels.
Expanding these passageways on a large scale called for new equipment and technology. The Carissa was the first mine in the district to use pneumatic drills running on compressed air. Ordinary gunpowder was replaced with recently developed nitroglycerin-based dynamite.
Dynamite has a way more powerful shattering effect on rock pound for pound than black powder does. So that was a big step forward. One man using a compressed air drill and dynamite could break in one day what it took 10 men to drill and break before that.
The Carissa boomed from about 1898 to 1905. More than 2,000 ounces of gold were extracted, worth nearly $2 million in today's dollars. After proving the value of the mine, Federal's president, John Spry, intended to attract a large corporate buyer and sell out. But by 1906, with expenses mounting and no takers, he closed the Carissa. It remained shuttered for nearly 25 years until Spry's death. In the 1920s, the economy was roaring and Americans searched far and wide for new financial opportunities. Such was the case for a group of Washington state investors who formed Midwest Mines Corporation and took over the Carissa on a lease agreement with Federal. Hopes were high their investment would pan out. They borrowed money and built a new head frame and trestle. An unused mill house was transported piece by piece from nearby Atlantic City and reassembled on site to become the Carissa Mill seen today. However, Midwest would still use a traditional stamp mill and mercury-based recovery to produce gold bullion. A steam hoist lifted fully laden ore cars out of the mine, up the head frame, to the overhead trestle. There, the car rode on tracks to the mill's uppermost level. Once the ore car was emptied, gravity alone was intended to carry the material through the processing equipment. With all these improvements, the future was looking bright. But fatefully, the year was 1929. That October, the stock market crashed, and the subsequent Great Depression created panic among the Carissa's many creditors. They demanded payment. The newly minted venture was forced to abandon operations just a year later. Once again, the Carissa mine and mill closed. This time until 1946.
After World War II, another company came in and tore out all that old stuff and scrapped it and installed for what that time was modern milling equipment.
For the first time, the Carissa's underground mining operations could no longer keep up with the mill's ability to separate gold from waste rock. It was a model of mechanized efficiency. First, a series of closely spaced iron bars, called a grizzly, sorted out oversized rocks. Then the ore was collected in a bin and released to a gyratory crusher, which uniformly reduced the rock to walnut size. A second crusher further decreased it to pebble size. Now the ore traveled to a ball mill containing 2 tons of baseball-sized steel balls. The twice-crushed ore was pulverized to a sand-like consistency. A steady flow of water through the ball mill pushed the powdered ore into a mineral jig for initial gold recovery. Pulses of water separated the heavy gold from light sands. From the jig, the water and ore slurry mixed with the chemical xanthate, which attracted the metallic gold particles. With the addition of pine oil to the mixture, the gold particles literally floated away from the waste sands. Revolving paddles brushed the mineral-laden foam from the flotation cells for recovery. Wastes from the flotation cells still contained traces of gold and were diverted over a Wilfley shaker table. Here, the combination of water flow and vibration caused the heavy gold particles to move one way while the lighter weight wastes washed away. A fine stream of heavy black sands and gold was collected on one side of the table. The waste sands and residue gold traveled to agitators, where they were mixed with sodium cyanide. The deadly poison dissolved the gold, just as water dissolves sugar. This gold and cyanide mixture was then pumped to a series of decantation or settling tanks. Gravity slowly pulled the remaining solids to the bottom, while the gold remained dissolved in the clear liquid above. The chemically treated waste sands from the tank bottoms were directed to a nearby gulch for disposal. There was no concern for the environmental impact of such practices. At this point, the gold-laden fluid, or pregnant solution, also called liquor, was routed through a filter that produced a crystal-clear liquid of water, cyanide, and gold. A vacuum chamber vented dissolved gases from the solution prior to gold recovery. A primary recovery tank and wooden secondary tank channeled the gold-bearing solution into a manifold of pipes. Recovery socks, or bags attached to the pipes, collected gold through a known chemical reaction. The cotton bags contained zinc powder or shavings. Cyanide has a stronger attraction to zinc than to gold. When the cyanide and gold solution entered the bags, the cyanide absorbed the zinc and released the gold. This new cyanide-zinc solution passed through the bags, leaving behind the gold. After collection, the gold was fired in the Carissa's tilting casting furnace, producing small ingots. These ingots were delivered to South Pass City's United States Post Office and shipped to the U.S. Mint in Denver, Colorado. The Mint assessed the weight and purity of the gold and deposited the appropriate amount of cash into the Carissa's account. And that is how the Carissa Mill turned tough, coarse rock into cold, hard cash.